Hey there, and welcome. We talk about our rights all the time, the right to free speech, the right to vote, you name it. But have you ever stopped and asked the really big question behind all of that? I mean, seriously, where do they come from? Are they just something we're born with, handed down from nature or a higher power? Or do they only spring into existence because a government decides to write them down on paper? Well, that's the massive question we're going to unpack today. Okay, let's get into it. Before we can even touch those huge philosophical debates, we got to make sure we're all on the same page. What do we even mean when we use the word rights? Let's build that foundation right now. So, according to this definition, a right isn't just something you want or feel like you deserve. No, it's a justified claim. That means there's a solid, logical reason behind it that your community, that society, agrees with. And this part is absolutely crucial. It's made real by the state. The government guarantees it, and that's what gives it teeth. Let's break that down even more. A right starts as a good idea, a justified claim. Then, society has to get on board. And finally, the law protects it. But that last step, linked to a duty, that's the secret sauce. Think about it. Your right to free speech is tied to your duty not to slander someone and ruin their life. There are two sides of the exact same coin. You really can't have one without the other. So what gives rights all their power? Well, it comes down to these four core principles. They're inherent. You get them just by being born a person. Simple as that. They're universal, meaning they apply to everyone, no matter who you are or where you live. They're inalienable, which is just a fancy way of saying no one can legitimately take them away from you. And they're indivisible, which means they're all connected. You can't fully have, say, a right to health if you don't also have a right to information or education. They all work together. Okay, so with that definition locked in, let's look at how rights actually apply to different parts of our lives. It kind of helps to think of them as coming in about five main categories, or flavors, if you will. And here they are. You've got your civil rights. That's the core stuff, protecting your personal freedom, your life, your liberty. Then you have political rights, which are all about having a say in how things are run, voting, speaking your mind. After that come economic and social rights, which are about ensuring you can live with some dignity. Things like fair wages and access to healthcare. And last but not least, cultural rights, which protect your identity and your connection to your community's heritage. All right, our foundation is officially laid. Now it's time for the main event, the epic philosophical clash over where rights actually come from. This is a battle of ideas that's been going on for centuries, and it really gets to the very soul of what a right is. So in one corner, you've got the natural rights theorists, like John Locke. They argue that rights to things like life, liberty, and property are just inherent. They exist in nature, maybe from God, way before any governments were ever formed. But in the other corner, you have the legal rights theorists, like Jeremy Bentham. And they say, that's a nice thought, but a right is totally meaningless until it's written down in a law book and enforced by the state. And you really can't get a more blunt rejection of natural rights than this zinger from Bentham. He called them nonsense upon stilts. Just picture that for a second. For him, if you couldn't point to a specific law that grants you a right, then for all practical purposes, that right just doesn't exist. It's a very powerful, very practical way of looking at the world. But the debate doesn't just end there. Oh no. Other brilliant minds came along and said, hold on a minute, you're both missing some really crucial pieces of the puzzle. And this is where the conversation gets even richer and way more complicated. For example, Marxists came along and argued that in a capitalist system, rights are often just a tool to protect the property of the rich, not the well-being of the poor. Then you have the utilitarians, who judge a right with one simple question. Does it create the most happiness for the most people? And more recently, feminist and critical theorists have shaken up the whole conversation, pointing out that traditional rights often completely ignored the struggles of women and minorities, and that we need new rights to address things like bodily autonomy. And this chart here really captures the central problem with that utilitarian view. I mean, if a right is only justified by creating the most happiness, what happens when making the 90% happy means you have to violate the rights of the 10%? That's the great dilemma. In theory, utilitarianism could justify sacrificing an individual for the so-called greater good. And to really round out the picture, we have to mention two more big ideas. There's the classic liberal tradition, which sees rights as your personal shield, something to protect you from a government that gets too powerful. And then there's the pluralist view, which makes a really cool point. Rights don't just come from the government. They also bubble up from the social groups we belong to, like our families, unions, or religious organizations. So, after all that, where does this leave us? We've zipped through a half dozen different theories, each one with its own powerful logic. You might be wondering, okay, so which one is right? Well, that's kind of the whole point.
The big takeaway here is that there isn't a single winner. The modern idea of rights is a complex tapestry woven together from all these different threads. Some theories give us a moral compass, others give us enforceability, and others push us towards social justice. Each one offers a vital piece of the puzzle for understanding what our rights really are.
And you know what? This is actually a huge strength. Because there's no final, settled answer, the conversation never stops. And this ongoing debate is what allows our understanding of rates to grow and adapt to totally new challenges, whether it's the internet, climate change, or new kinds of inequality we haven't even seen yet. Which leaves us with one last big question for you to think about. If our idea of rights is always changing to meet the needs of the time, what's the next big one? What's the right that we barely talk about today that will be absolutely essential for the next generation? The right to digital privacy? The right to a stable climate? The answer to that is a conversation that we are all a part of. Thanks so much for tuning in.